If you're listening to this, chances are you're running a hotel or a restaurant, or maybe even both. And let's be real, you've got a lot on your plate.
Yeah, no kidding.
We get it. It's a tough business.
Mm.
But one thing that can make it a little easier is having a solid grasp of your finances. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. The financial indicators that really matter for your bottom line, for your profitability.
Right, the numbers you need to know without drowning in a sea of, financial jargon.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're tapping into the wisdom of Maurice. He's a hospitality professional, a real veteran in the food and beverage world.
And he's got some really insightful advice on how to analyze the financial health of your restaurant and even more importantly, how to improve it.
Right, so think of this as your crash course in restaurant financials.
Yeah.
No boring lectures, just straight talk on how to make your business more profitable.
Sounds good to me.
So Maurice lays out a really clear roadmap for looking at your business through this, financial lens. And it all starts with a fundamental concept: sales excluding VAT. Now, this might seem basic, but it's a crucial starting point for all your calculations.
Yeah, it's like the foundation of the whole thing.
Right, because Maurice stresses that to really see how much revenue you're actually generating, you need to strip away that value-added tax, because that's money you're collecting on behalf of the government, not money that stays in your business.
Right, it's not really yours to spend.
Exactly, and he gives a really simple example to illustrate this. Let's say a customer walks in and pays €100 for their meal, and let's assume, for simplicity, that the VAT rate is 10%.
Okay, so 10% VAT.
Yeah. That means your actual sales figure, the one you should be working with to figure out your costs and set your targets, is €90 too, because that €10 of VAT goes straight to the tax authorities.
Ah, okay, I see.
And Maurice really hammers home the importance of this. He says understanding your sales excluding VAT is absolutely essential for getting a realistic picture of your costs. Because if you're including the VAT in your revenue figures, it's like trying to measure your height with your shoes on.
Right, you're getting a distorted view.
Exactly. So once you've got that clear sales figure excluding VAT, the next critical area Maurice focuses on is material costs. And this is basically what you spend on all the ingredients that go into your food and drinks. The raw materials, so to speak.
Right, the stuff that goes into actually making the food.
Exactly. And Maurice points out that on average in the restaurant industry, these material costs tend to be around 30% of your sales, excluding VAT.
30%, that's a pretty big chunk.
It is, yeah. So going back to Maurice's example of 90 in sales without VAT, he suggests aiming for around €27 in material costs. So this is where things start to get really practical. And Maurice offers what he calls a chef's tip, some really hands-on advice for those of you in the kitchen.
Okay, what's the secret sauce?
Well, it's actually two tips in one. First, Maurice says you got to be a sharp negotiator with your suppliers, because even small percentage reductions in your ingredient costs can add up to some serious savings over time.
Yeah, every little bit helps.
Absolutely. And then his second tip is all about tackling food waste, because that's a silent killer of profits. So things like efficient stock rotation, smart portion control, and finding creative ways to use leftover ingredients, all of these can really help bring that material cost percentage down.
Makes sense. Less waste, more profit.
Exactly. So you've got your sales, you've subtracted the cost of what you sold, and that brings us to the gross margin. This is where we start to see how efficiently you're turning those raw ingredients into revenue.
Right, the money you're actually making on each dish before all the other expenses kick in.
Exactly. And Maurice points out that a healthy average gross margin is around 70% of your sales, excluding VAT. So if we continue with our example of €90 in sales and €27 in material costs, that leaves us with a gross margin of €63, which is, right on the money, 70%.
Okay, so we're hitting that target.
We are, but Maurice also has a pro tip here. And it's not just about being thrifty with your ingredients. It's about what he calls strategic menu engineering.
Interesting. What does that mean?
Well, it means really analyzing your menu to identify the dishes with the highest profit margins. And maybe giving those dishes a little extra love, promoting them more, featuring them prominently. It could also involve tweaking recipes, maybe substituting a slightly less expensive ingredient without sacrificing taste or quality.
Right, so it's a balancing act.
It is. Finding that sweet spot between maximizing your profit and keeping your customers happy with the dishes they love.
Makes sense.
All right, so we've covered the cost of goods, the actual food itself, but now let's talk about the people who make it all happen.
Yeah.
Your staff. And staff costs, those are more than just hourly wages, right?
Oh, for sure. It includes everything. Salaries, wages, Social Security contributions, health insurance, all those employee-related benefits.
Right, the whole package. And Maurice highlights that, on average, these staff costs represent about 40% of your sales, excluding VAT.
40%. Wow, that's a significant chunk.
Yeah, it is. So for our ongoing example of €90 in sales, that would be roughly €36 going towards staff costs. And Maurice has a management tip here that focuses on making the most of your staff, scheduling them efficiently.
Okay, so how do we optimize that?
Well, it's about carefully analyzing your peak and off-peak hours. You want to make sure
Yeah.
you have the right number of staff on duty at the right times. Because overstaffing during slow periods can eat into your profits, but understaffing during rush hour can lead to poor service and frustrated customers.
Yeah, you definitely don't want that.
Right. So it's about finding that optimal balance, having enough people to handle the workload, but not so many that you're wasting money on idle hands.
Efficiency is key.
Exactly. So now we've looked at the two biggest direct costs in your restaurant, the food itself and the people who serve it. And Maurice brings these two together with the concept of the margin on prime costs. And this is a really insightful metric for understanding how well your restaurant is managing its core operational expenses.
Yeah, it sounds like it gets to the heart of things.
It does. The prime cost is simply the sum of your material costs and your staff costs. And many investors and financial analysts pay close attention to this figure because it gives them a clear indication of how efficiently a restaurant is being run.
Okay, so how do we measure up?
Well, Maurice suggests aiming for a prime cost that's no more than 70% of your sales, excluding VAT. So that leaves you with a margin on prime costs of at least 30%.
Okay, got it. 70% prime cost, 30% margin.
Right. But if we go back to Maurice's example, he had €27 in material costs and 36 in staff costs. So that adds up to a total prime cost of €63, which is exactly 70% of his €90 in sales. So he's hitting that target, but he still throws out a challenge here.
A challenge, even though he's on target.
Yeah, because hitting that 70% mark doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement. Maurice's challenge is to constantly be looking for ways to optimize both your material and your staff costs without compromising the quality of your food or the service you provide to your customers. Because that remaining 30% margin on prime costs, that has to cover all your other operating expenses and ultimately deliver your profit.
Right. So we're not just celebrating yet, we're still looking for ways to improve.
Exactly. Because running a successful restaurant is a marathon, not a sprint.
I like that.
All right, so we've covered the big ticket items, food and staff. But then there are all those other running expenses, the overheads, things like rent, utilities, repairs, marketing, all those necessary costs of doing business.
The stuff that keeps the lights on and the doors open.
Exactly. And Maurice estimates that these overheads typically account for around 12% of your sales, excluding VAT. So for our example, with €90 in sales, that's roughly €10 going towards overheads. And Maurice has a money-saving tip for this category, too.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Well, he's a big advocate for smart resource management. He recommends investing in energy-efficient equipment, being mindful of lighting and heating usage, things like that. He also says you should regularly review all your overhead expenses to see if there are any non-essential costs that you can cut back on.
Yeah, you gotta watch those pennies.
Absolutely. Because even small savings here and there can add up over time.
For sure.
Okay, so we've built a pretty detailed financial picture here. We've gone from sales down to overheads, and now we arrive at a really important measure of your restaurant's core profitability, the gross operating profit, which is often referred to as EBITDA.
EBITDA, that sounds familiar. But refresh my memory, why is it so crucial?
Well, EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And it's a really useful metric because it strips away all those external factors like financing costs and accounting treatments to give you a clear view of how profitable your core restaurant operations are.
Okay, so it's the real nitty-gritty of how your business is performing.
Exactly. And Maurice states that a healthy target for EBITDA is around 18% of your sales, excluding VAT. So for our ongoing example, that would be €16.2 on €90 in sales.
18%, got it.
And Maurice emphasizes that regularly analyzing this ratio is the key to success because your EBITDA tells you how well your core business model is working. By tracking it over time, you can spot trends. Is your profitability improving or declining? And that allows you to make informed decisions about pricing, cost control, your overall strategy.
Right, you're using the numbers to guide your actions.
Exactly. Because if your EBITDA is consistently below that 18% benchmark, that's a signal that you might need to take a closer look at your material costs, your staff costs, or your overheads.
Yeah, something's got to change.
Right. Now, EBITDA tells you how well your core operations are doing, but there are still a few more steps to take to get to your actual net profit, the money you actually take home. And Maurice takes us beyond EBITDA to consider those other factors.
Okay, what else do we need to account for?
Well, to get to your net profit, you need to deduct a few more items from your EBITDA. Maurice highlights occupancy costs, which he estimates might be around 11% of your sales, excluding VAT, on average. Then there are taxes, which can vary depending on your location, but he suggests budgeting around 15%. And then there might be some unusual or one-off expenses that pop up from time to time.
Right, unexpected things always seem to happen.
They do. So if we continue with our example of €90 in sales, after deducting about €9.90 for occupancy costs and €13 for taxes, along with any other potential expenses, Maurice points to a potential net profit of around 5.40 Now that might not seem like a huge number, but Maurice has a really encouraging perspective on it. He calls it the ultimate motivation, because even a modest net profit, when it's achieved through sound financial management and a clear understanding of all these levers we've been discussing, can grow significantly over time. Small improvements in each of those earlier ratios, a little reduction in material costs, a slight increase in staff efficiency, all contribute to a larger and more sustainable net profit.
So it's all about the long game.
It is. It's about taking a holistic view of your restaurant's finances and making smart, data-driven decisions. And Maurice, this seasoned hospitality professional, really drives home the point that by getting to grips with these key financial indicators, you can transform your business into a more profitable and resilient operation. It's about combining your passion for hospitality with a sharp understanding of the numbers that drive your success.
Absolutely. And he makes it clear that these financial concepts don't have to be intimidating. By taking the time to regularly analyze your own figures, compare them to the benchmarks he provides, and then use those insights to adjust your strategies, you can really take control of your restaurant's financial destiny.
It's a continuous process of learning and adapting. And on that note, here's a final thought to chew on. While mastering these financial levers is essential for building a profitable business, never underestimate the power of that initial spark, that passion for cooking, for creating memorable experiences, for taking care of your guests. Because at the end of the day, it's that dedication to your craft that will keep people coming back for more, building loyalty, and driving sustainable profitability in the long run.
Could have said it better myself.
Thanks for diving in with us today. We'll catch you on the next one.
See you then.